Hi everyone, welcome to the Beckfoot Lifelong Learners podcast. It's Amy again here, and I've got a lovely special guest today. Dave's behind the camera as always and doing all the filming. So without further ado, let's introduce today's guest. Who are you, Luke?
Hi, I'm Luke Parkinson. I'm an English teacher. I am Beckfoot School's literacy lead.
Cool. So as this is the Beckfoot Lifelong Learners podcast, we always start by asking, is there something that you have learned recently? It can be as deep and meaningful or as fleeting and passing or relaxed as you want it to be.
I've got an incredibly nerdy teacher answer.
Cool.
Because I'm doing a course.
Teacher answers.
I'm doing a course, so I have to do lots of reading for the course, and I do have other interests beyond literacy, but maybe not actually in the past year or for the next 10. What have I learned recently about motivating students extrinsically and intrinsically, which was fascinating to me because it was kind of, when there's someone puts into words something that you probably sort of had some sense of when you've been teaching a while,
yeah.
and then you read it and you kind of go, that's what it's called,
right.
and that really helps. So this has been really interesting to think about what motivates students and how you can do small things in the classroom that motivates them in a way beyond sort of our reward systems and our extrinsic sort of approaches.
Cool. Is there any of those little bits that you could is there anything that stuck out that you think, I've tried that and it's worked?
For me, the thing that I picked up on most in the reading was about the way you give praise to a student, and I think it resonated because I think I could hear myself saying a lot of the things that are probably not very good things to say in terms of trying to motivate a student. So we all know the value of praise,
yeah.
and we might shower our students in praise, knowing that it's likely to motivate them. But it made me think a lot about the way you give that praise. One of the things that really stuck with me was how a student might perceive praise praise like, that was excellent, make sure you do it again. Which I'm sure I've said versions of that, maybe that exactly to students.
PE,
but how a student might perceive that unconsciously as a controlling behaviour, and that might therefore limit the motivational capacity of that praise. And so it's really made me think about the way I give praise to, particularly I've got a couple of tricky classes where students who are very scared of putting themselves out there because they don't feel very confident. Of getting things wrong. That's a real problem that I've been facing this year with some of my classes, and so it's made me think a lot about the way I praise them. So I'm trying to be really specific. So I'm trying to say this thing that we've just been learning about today. You did that really well because you did this, and kind of stop the praise there, and so that they feel they can be successful in this small thing that you've been training them to do, and that over time that should hopefully build up to lead them to a place where they motivate from inside intrinsically, and so that's something that really sort of hit home.
I think this could be another podcast. We'll have to get you booked in. Like this, literally, I feel like this is something that we could go down a proper rabbit warren with.
I think so. Yeah. And that was based on just like a page or so of reading.
Oh my gosh! Right. Well, we'll get you booked in again to discuss praise.
Right,
but
okay.
What are you here to talk about today?
I'm here to talk about literacy.
Oh, lovely.
Because that's my thing.
That is your thing. Literacy lead, that is your thing. So what specifically do you want to talk about in the realms of literacy, and why is it important to you, I suppose?
Well, literacy is huge, and so it's, in terms of talking about something that's specific and that we can get done in 15 minutes, it makes sense, I guess, to talk about where we are as a school and what we're doing at the moment, and what I'm doing at the moment to try and, to help us with literacy. So we've just launched a new literacy policy, which is, how long have we been preparing for that? Well, I guess I took over as literacy lead in 2020 during the pandemic, and so it's taken us a few years to get to the point where we've got a whole school new reading policy to roll out. So I guess I want to talk about what that's all about, its fundamentals and where it came from.
Perfect.
So we've got a new policy rolled out across the school. Its fundamental goal, and where I always started from with reading, was trying to increase the amount of reading practice that students get across a day. Because we know, I guess I know from many years of experience that as much as we try to motivate students to read outside of school, we lose control of them when they walk out of our classroom. And some will read at home and some won't, and a small number might read because we told them to, but a much bigger number will not read because we told them to. And we know it's fundamental. We know it's incredibly important to everything they do. So I wanted to make sure that we were taking more responsibility as educators in school for the amount of reading that gets done. So I started from an assumption or a belief that it doesn't matter how much reading is being done in the school at the moment. We need to make them read more, and so because I didn't know across the curriculum exactly how much reading was being done. As an English teacher, there's a fair amount of reading being done in my classroom. Although since we started doing this, it made me think about my own practice, and maybe not as much as could have been. But so the first part of it was kind of how do we make kids read more. So that translated into one of the tenets of the new policy, which is choose text.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I'm keen to drive, which is that when a concept or an idea or a method or something is to be introduced to a class, often the best way of doing that, or a really effective way of doing that, is to do it through reading. Yeah. And that many teachers will not default to reading. We
default to, watch this YouTube video.
Yes, exactly. And that was something that definitely that started to become clear as I started to look across the curriculum at the way.
Yeah, you came round and you spoke to every faculty.
I did, yeah.
Speak to us.
And probably one of the most powerful things I did was I followed a student for a day, and just followed. I chose a student with a low reading age, who had various barriers to literacy, and followed him through a day and looked at the amount of reading he did in a day, and it wasn't much. Yeah. That was only a one snapshot, but it kind of hammered home. Yeah.
Lots of kids experience.
If that was typical of every day, then he wasn't reading very much, and when he wasn't reading at home. So this was someone who would benefit from just reading more, and so that's the kind of one of the biggest things about the literacy policy, is just anything we can do to try and make students read more, and I think it's starting to have some impact. I'm seeing a lot of positive stuff from across the school, from all kinds of different faculties. I know now that a year down the line, from first starting to think about introducing this stuff, that there's a lot more text being used in lessons, and the students are reading a lot more. So that in itself is a useful thing. That all skills develop through practice, and giving them chances to practice will bring those skills on. But there's such a thing as good and bad practice. And you'll know as PE teacher, I often use PE analogies when talking to classes about reading. I often use sport analogies, and about because reading and training are very similar. In that there's a set of skills that can be observed and practiced, and that don't necessarily feel natural, but that through practice you might internalise and master them, and then get really better at something. And that's the other kind of side of the policy, which is a set of reading strategies that we can employ to make sure that increased practice that students get when they read is more impactful and has a better has more worth for them. They're reading skills that came. Where I kind of selected them, strategies, not skills, but where I selected them from was largely from the intervention package that we brought in 2020 or just after for dealing with our COVID impact.
Yes,
because my first year as literacy lead was very much about intervention. It was pandemic recovery.
Yes.
And it was in many ways it was great. I didn't realise at the time how much of a good foundation it was, but because it meant that we were targeting a very specific number of students with a very specific need that we measured. We had a package that we used. We were lucky to have lots of staff available to deliver that intervention, to train them, and it had massive impact. And so it kind of showed to me the value and what can be done if targeted reading intervention is delivered to a student. So that kind of, I kind of built that out for the second part of our policy, and it just comes down to helping students make sure that they've understood and accessed a text. So that might mean summarising it. So one of our strategies is summarise.
Yeah.
So it's always a good thing for a teacher to ask a class when they've read something to summarise it in. I often tell staff that a decreasing number of words is a good way to go, or an increasing number of words start from a single word summary and build up, or that's a really useful skill.
So checking like comprehension.
Yeah. So comprehension is the broad, really.
We just making sure that they've understood what they've actually read.
Yeah. And so beyond that, from there, the policy will be used in very different ways across the different departments. And I think that at the stage we're at right now is departments figuring out what their approach to this is, because the policy has been kept intentionally. It's not too specific. It's not too prescriptive in terms of you must do this, you must do that, because I know that there isn't a one size fits all to reading across the curriculum. Reading is disciplinary, and that's our next big steps. I think with reading will need to be around disciplinary literacy, about how the maths department read, because for them it's not always going to be about extended text. But what always strikes me about maths reading is how quickly very sophisticated vocabulary terms stack into a single sentence, or a one-word phrase. That there's so much potential there for a student to struggle if if they don't if a student. I was doing the class the other day something about factoring primes or factors of primes, and that a student might understand what a factor is, they might understand what a prime is, but often in maths those things are put together into these very complex sentences that sometimes I read a math sentence and think,
I'm like that every cover lesson I get, and for maths I'm like, oh god.
I always try my best to figure it out, but I leave every maths cover astounded by what a maths teacher has to do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is incredible, and that's right now we're trying to kind of figure out what works with this policy and maths. But they'll find their own version of what works for them with that policy, and the same for science and for across the curriculum. So there's still a long way to go with it. We've introduced it, staff are getting familiarised with it. There's a lot of sort of strategies that people are trying out and working with, and we're incredibly lucky to work in a school where staff are so keen to learn. And so I think we've got a really good, strong learning culture here.
I agree. It's been really, even from a PE point of view, you might fob us off and think, PE wouldn't buy into it, but a couple of members of our department have based their instructional coaching around the policy and trying to, and for us, they're almost like the trial, so that what they can figure out what works for us in terms of the literacy policy. So moving forward, we can make sure that we're employing it the best way we can for the kids. Yeah, I think it's different from my perspective. It's one of the things that I was always sensitive was that I don't want to go into a department and give people more work to do that isn't part of their subject. And I think what I hope is clear in the policy is that increased reading practice, we can do that very cleverly. And we can do it in a way that supports the learning of your subject and doesn't, it isn't just kind of some awkward add-on that you have to do. And I think embedded throughout. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, as a teacher, I find that I love the challenge of sort of a new strategy that is going to work and trying to work that into your lessons. And I think that thankfully it's been embraced in the right spirit here, as people are trying to just kind of to know, I know this is important, and I know that I don't do it very much. What does it look like in my lessons when it's working well? That's that, and I think that my next question was going to be, where do you see it going? We've kind of answered that throughout there. We've got this policy, it's being put into place, and now I suppose the exciting bit is how each department makes it their own.
Yeah.
Like you say, doesn't make it an onerous task, but embeds it like fluidly without it being another job, just something that we can all work towards together.
Yeah, I mean, something I was very keen to do from the start is offer people tools that fundamentally improve their practice and therefore have, last for their career.
Yeah.
Not because there's a policy that says you have to do this thing and you bolt it onto your teaching, but because you've been given something that makes you a better teacher and you know it. And I think that that's where we'll have success. That's where we'll have a big impact on staff and empower our staff to be better teachers. And we'll have a massive impact on kids and on their outcomes, on their life chances, on their reading, their reading accuracy, but also building up to pleasure.
That's the goal, isn't it? That like as PE teachers, we want them to leave school and find like joy in going out and doing physical activity because they've chosen to do it. And a goal must be as well and all teachers for them to go and enjoy their learning. And one massive way to access any learning is reading, but also reading for joy and mindfulness, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I hope that what we're doing is leading them to discover reading for pleasure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of literacy policies in schools that I've worked in the past or that I've encountered are very much about piling pressure on kids to read, and I think in some cases that's counterproductive. And again, there'll be something. This does remind me of my own PE experience. I was terrible at PE at school. I got on with all my teachers very well at school, but my PE teachers were not fans of me because I didn't behave well in their lessons. I'm sure you would. But when I look back, like the reason, a lot of the reason for that conflict and that difficulty I had in that subject was like I didn't grow up in a household in which sport was celebrated. Yeah. My dad loved to read, and so I grew up reading a lot, and I never played football. It was never discussed. It was this huge cultural thing that I had no access to. And then I very much remember feeling isolated in my year 7 and 8 sort of PE lessons where all the football boys came to the fore and did their thing, and the teacher felt like one of them, and it felt like I was really being excluded by being made to feel that I had to be into this thing. Yeah. And if my PE teachers had really wanted me to develop a passion for their subject and share their passion for their subject, they'd have made me good at football, and they'd have understood that this kid's never even kicked a ball before, and this kid needs to learn, needs to be given something that he can have success at in the short term. And then we need to build that up because I was, if I was a reader compared, if you in that situation, I couldn't blend the word cat, and everyone around me could read a full paragraph of academic text. And I think that's a...
Gosh, when you liken it like that it's massive, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of that. Remembering those experiences, I always think about my PE experiences in terms of trying to think about reading. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think things are always more enjoyable if you get success at it. So that's the end goal, I suppose, of the policy. So just to sum up then, just if you were to sum it up, if one of your challenges to shorten things down, just in 30 seconds, what's the policy, what impact has it had so far, and to sum up, where's it going?
So the policy is read more, do it better. I think that's pretty succinct.
Yeah, very succinct.
It's currently working really well. It's being embedded really well. It hasn't had impact yet, but it should. And where we're going next is writing. And we're already starting to see, I can see teachers naturally, thankfully, starting to realise that there's a snowball here in that when you start doing this reading stuff better, there's an interaction between the way you teach writing. And a lot of staff are starting to ask about writing. And that needs to be the next. That's our next big challenge.
And our next podcast. Well, we've got praise and writing.
Give it some time. We're going to get reading sorted first. But yeah.
Final thoughts then, in terms of was there any really interesting research you found whilst developing this policy? Is there anything that we could access?
Alex Quigley is the king of literacy in terms of on Twitter. Yeah, he's someone that's great to follow. Funky Pedagogy on Twitter provided a lot of a lot of Jennifer Webb provided a lot of sort of material that I read early on. They're two really great people to follow. I feel like if you follow those two on Twitter, you will inevitably find it does. Yes, you'll find yourself suddenly. You do. Yes.
And that's, I think, what these podcasts are all about: giving people a starting point to spark an interest to do more.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it so much.
You're very welcome.
And keep us in the loop, and we'll get you back on for our.
Well, I'd love to.
We could just ramble on forever, couldn't we? But thanks so much, guys. Thank you for listening, and or watching, whichever. And we'll see you or hear you on the next one. Thank you.